folks, this is Bob from Global Views, the BBD with Global Views, continuing on China. Important to note, while we make a calculation on China, we have to know what it's all about, what it stands for, and what possibly its objectives are. We can't be caught in these woolly-headed notions of, if we look after their sensitivities, maybe they'll cut us some slack, which has obviously never happened. Whether you look at membership in the NSG group opposed, helping Pakistan with terrorism, opposing our membership into the United Nations, they are full tilt against every move we make. So to expect them that they're going to suddenly turn a new leaf is living in the la-la land. And just remember, it's one of the oldest imperialist nations. They may just want to run around and try to pretend it's been slighted by the imperialistic powers of the white world, and may want and likes to kind of use that guilt complex to get back at these guys. But remember, they are an absolute revanchist power, and using all kinds of historical, minute associations to lay claim on land. They're a hegemon, and this has to be right in the center of our face. And it's not a benign, it's absolutely not a benign, it has no intent, it's got not a single benign intent if you oppose it. If you, on the other hand, kowtow like it wants everybody to because of its Middle Kingdom attitude, you're okay. But do you want that? Probably not. And like I was said, the world's like kind of turning against it. Washington, as we've seen with the Quad, is full tilt. You have very similar opposition coming out of Westminster. Look at here what's happening in another of its backyards, which is Myanmar. 32 Chinese factories vandalized in Myanmar, so much so that Taiwan has cautioned all its people to say fly Taiwan flags, Taipei to Taiwanese companies in Myanmar. And this is another interesting article which again has interest to India. India's Act East must factor this in. Post-pandemic, Southeast Asia increasingly distrusts China and trusts the Washington administration. It says this survey was done by Singapore. Based Institute of Southeast Asian Studies reveals interesting facts that may have implications for our Act East policy and help our policy makers calibrate their approach towards the region. State of Southeast Asia 2021 survey shows the tracking of trust and distrust. He says, in contrast to China's trust quotient going downwards, the Washington image in the eyes of Southeast Asians improved, even in countries apparently heavily tilted towards Beijing. And at the country level, 7 Asian countries chose China last year, which has reversed to 7 siding with Washington this year, with Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand switching sides. In contrast to China's deteriorating distrust rating, Southeast Asians' trust in the Washington administration has improved, increasing from 30.3 in 2020 to 48.4%. Right? Then it says those who distrust China increased from 51.5% in 2019 to 60.4% in 2020 and 63% this year. So things are not looking hunky-dory for China, folks, all across the world, including in their backyard. And as I said, in the economy, in trouble, China mulls new action to lift flagging births. Why? Because falling births put China growth at risk. It says China workforce is expected to shrink by more than 0.5% a year. The Capital Economic Report said, as fewer younger people replace a growing number of retirees. That can be difficult. They've also had a big battle on their hands and a declining graph at the UN. As Manjeev Singh Puri writes, Chinese rise and fall at the UN. The UN season, though, started on an auspicious note for India, with India besting China in the elections for a seat in the UN's Commission on the Status of Women. This was the first such victory in a decade. To add to China's woes, soon after the CSW vote, it lost another election, this time to tiny Samoa, for a seat on the UN Statistical Commission, and a couple of days ago it just about managed to get elected to the UN Human Rights Council, coming fourth out of 5 contestants for 4 vacancies. Earlier in the year, India was elected as a non-permanent member of the UNSC for a 2-year term. India will also host BRICS and the G20. So India can use this ballast too, because even in there's a declining graph in the UN, and this is really coming to be a problem for Xi. Beijing to tighten grip on Hong Kong polls. Hong Kong detains 47 activists for subversion. China plans to assimilate Hong Kong is working. Hong Kong pro-democracy activists back in detention. And this sinks, right? This is really grabbing headlines all across the Western world. Let's see how it plays out, right? Whether this wins or the economic agenda. Let us see, folks. And then we have China detains executive of Tencent and Graph Probe. And while we decide what we are doing with China, folks, we also must remember who are the people we can rely on at this point of time. I know our policy keeps going back and swinging to Moscow, where this agreement apparently was also kind of hammered out, just like the Tashkent where the USSR let us down. But when we look at that, look at this. Beijing and Moscow team up in new space race with Washington, and you know for a fact that Moscow is tied in very closely to Beijing because of its own focus to rise out of what it's been consigned to as the middle power and rise up again, thinking it can jostle with the big boys, which it obviously can't without China. More after the break. Folks, now after getting over the woolly-eyed or woolly-headed concept of China, let's focus on the realities. What do we think they wanted? And here Lieutenant General Rameshwar Yadav has a good point. He says, China seems to be targeting to achieve multiple objectives in political, economic and military parlance. Political subservience of India is the key to all their designs, which can be achieved through optimal military overtures against a soft state like India in the Chinese perspective. Accordingly, Chinese aim appears to be political domination of India through coercive psychological pressure, with threats of repeat of punitive campaign, presuming an early capitulation of Indian polity. India is considered to be a threat to Chinese ambitions of global leadership and regional dominance due to presumed inimical Indian designs both in Ladakh as well as the Indian Ocean, right? Then it says further to above, the Indian assertion of illegality of CPEC, and this is the most important one, alignment through the territory of Gilgit-Baltistan has deep connect with Chinese national interest. Therefore, India needs to be silenced by force as she has consistently refused to join CPEC. He says, to achieve this, China has planned to secure areas which facilitate denial of threat to Karakoram Pass, leading to the gateway of start point of CPEC at Kashgar. At the same time, China is creating a firm base opposite the possible ingress routes across the Ladakh range to deny Indian offensive, and at the same time seek options for connectivity to Gilgit-Baltistan if required, right? In view of foregoing, what possibly is China looking at by all the military show that they have orchestrated over the last 5 months plus? China clearly intends to dominate India through military coercion so as to make India fall in line and modify her political conduct in sync with Chinese interests. In that, the emerging politico-military alliance of India with Washington, with potentials of economic strangulation in the Indo-Pacific, is one of the main concerns of China. And this is what is important to note, folks. This is where it's important, and like CEO Bhaskar writes, following from that, what Pangong means for Asian geopolitics. It's very important, right? While Delhi's resolve to resist Beijing's aggressive bellicosity effectively will be noted by the smaller nations, the Delhi-Beijing bilateral dynamic will also shape and be shaped by the Washington-China-India triangle. President Joe Biden has signaled that the Washington will hold Beijing's feet to the fire over the Indo-Pacific and the principles of freedom of navigation and territorial integrity, with a continued focus on reinvigorated Quad. How China reads this message and how it wishes to orient itself in relation to contested territory will shape many outcomes in Asia and beyond. Pangong is the bellwether, folks, bellwether. And as Kanti Bajpayee writes, back to the future, which brings us to post-Galwan. India now appears to have returned to the original Indira Gandhi policy from 66 to 80. It will not have much to do with China until border stability is restored. Border negotiations and normalization seem impossible. Instead, building Indian power through Atmanirbhar efforts and through a quasi-alliance with a distant great power is to be the core of India's approach. And while he's talked about it this cynically, I think this is the way to go. But Kanti Bajpayee has died in the world socialist. I'm very, very wary of usual Western influence. So you can forgive him from that. But what he's got is absolutely right, folks? And then what we have is here, a 62-20, a study in contrast by Samantha. He says, how is in 1962, India made the error of framing the China standoff in pure army terms. It never used the Air Force, fearing escalation. This time, India was quick to bring all its resources into play, pressing ahead with deployment of its air assets. Also, naval elements in the Indian Ocean were moved to convey strategic intent, signaling that India will not see these developments as being restricted to the Himalayan frontline. But quite honestly, the gap between intent and execution was closed by Colonel Santosh Babu, who decided to stand his ground against Chinese forces and in doing so rewrote the rules of the engagement. India decided to challenge this notion by taking the battle into the economic sphere, especially the digital arena. Through its actions, it became the first country to actively start the digital decoupling from China. Many other countries have now taken similar measures, putting an end to the assumption on that India will not let the boundary dispute affect other parts of the relationship. But this is where China went totally wrong, folks. What's fundamentally changed since 62 is that India is no longer up against a China wanting to assert itself in a border dispute, but a China demanding acquiescence in its quest for global domination, folks. And that is got to be very clear, and I think it is very clear. More after the break. Come back, folks. Let's join all the dots for whatever we've said. Like I said, China's intent is not benign, so we should get over this woolly-headed notion that somehow we'll kind of get them to give us some slack. Like I said, just like the West is now beginning to realize that all this crazy notion that they had that as economic growth hits the people in China, it'll kind of revert from its communist tendencies to a democracy and obey the basic rules of the game globally. But that's not happened. It's just made the Communist Party a lot stronger and now taking on the world, and now actually wants to develop the world on its terms. It basically wants to say that, prosperity, economic prosperity without economic freedom, without democratic freedom, without free thought, free processes is the way to go. Basically, that autocracy is the call of the future, is what they're trying to say, and a lot of African nations are buying into it, and a lot of people with tendency who have these despotic tendencies are buying into it. But India has to be clear as what it wants, and let me just say this very clearly: if India wants to pull our population out of this poverty, we really need to align with the West, for which we have to burnish our democratic credentials. Jai Hind.